neke nepredviđene okolnosti se dogode pa utiču na to kako panel funkcioniše. Žao mi je što Orhan nije mogao da dođe u Beograd, ali prosto bila je viša sila i onda ćemo morati ovako razgovor da vodimo online. Ja bih voleo da pre svega kažem da iako je ovo događaj o privatnosti, nekako je, čim smo još pre 15 godina kao organizacija koja je, da kažemo, i počela da se bavi zaštitom podataka o ličnosti, postajali sve više i više svesni da zapravo nikad nije samo o privatnosti to što radimo, da kada dođe do nekog kršenja privatnosti ili zloupotrebe ličnih podataka, da se to obično čini ne zato što je nekome baš nekako vredan taj lični podatak, već zašto želi da ga, na primer, zloupotrebi ili proda ili nešto drugo uradi što donosi neku novu vrednost ili prednost ili uvećava moć. I u tom smislu nekako je postajalo sve godinama i godinama jasnije, posebno u kontekstu Srbije kakva je danas, da je privatnost vrlo bliska i uvezana i isprepletana konceptima slobode izražavanja i pokazalo se s vremenom i da je ona jedan neophodan preduslov za ispoljavanje osnovnih funkcija civilnog društva. I danas ćemo pričati o tome, dakle, nećemo robovati striktno temi Nedelje privatnosti, već ćemo želiti da postavimo stvari u jednu širu perspektivu, a kada kažem širu, mislim dvojako. Jedna je tematska perspektiva, dakle, kroz sve ove oblasti o kojima smo pričali, ali i teritorijalno širu perspektivu, dakle, razgovarat ćemo i o nekim globalnim trendovima i novostima. I sada, kada govorimo o tome šta će možda i biti u budućnosti, šta je moguće da će se dogoditi kako bismo bili adekvatno pripremljeni, uvijek je lepo sagledati gde smo bili pre x godina, koliko god daje, pa da pokušamo da uhvatimo trendove, da naslutimo šta se to i na koji način menja. Orhan je čovjek koji se pre svega bavi online prostorom. Jedan deo njegovog domena je i medijska sfera, ali on analizira stvari i bavi se i sagledavajući i šire od toga. I kada govorimo o slobodi izražavanja i u kontekstu aktivizma i novinarstva, volio bi ovaj razgovor da usmerimo pre svega u kontekstu online praksi. I deluje da je bilo potrebno više decenija da postane šire poznato da internet baš i nije toliko naš i baš toliko slobodan. Pa bih možda predložio da krenemo od Orhana upravo da vidimo kako to jedno osvajanje ili preuzimanje interneta danas izgleda, odnosno na koji način ta kontrola nad internetom danas uzima maha sve više i do kojih to posledica dovodi. To su već nekoliko pitanja koje bih vam postavio, pa možemo ići redom. Ali hajde da popričamo možda malo više o tom preuzimanju kontrole nad internetom. Šta su globalni trendovi danas u smislu online kontrole i online cenzurisanja i monitoringa?
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to express myself here, and I'm really sorry that I'm not with you there today, but so let's do this online. So Turkey provides some valuable lessons in regards to the political implications of online communication technologies over the society, because what we have been experiencing in the last 20 years in Turkey could actually be used as an example case by civil society and democratic communities all around the world in order to understand what would happen when we don't give emphasis to the and prioritize the most important things in regards to information communication technologies. So here is some anecdotal retrospective perspective from my own political and social and individual history. 20 years ago, almost, 2008, in Turkey, I remember the times where around my inner circles and professional and academic communities, students, professors, activists, journalists, etc., we used to consider the internet as this separate entity, separate sphere, which is much more freer than the actual physical world. And we were believing that this new cyberspace, virtual space, would allow us to somehow build democracy, right? Because in this new sphere, the government, the state, whom you are trying to create a change, cannot control you and cannot surveil you. And there is almost absolute freedom of speech. And we were almost always saying that whenever the topic comes, we were speaking as if internet innately is a good thing, right? Internet, good. Internet, democracy. Internet was seen as this magic, just like the magical wand example that you have just used in the previous panel. Internet used to be seen as a magical wand or some kind of magical ball that you throw over a country and then the country becomes democratic. That was the idea. Then, some of you might have heard this name, Evgeny Morozov. He wrote this book called The Net Delusion, 2009, I believe. And there he was using this phrase. He was saying that I have never encountered an autocratic leader who is not in love with his fax machine. The idea here is that he was telling us back then, information communication technologies are not necessarily pro-democracy, right? And I'm not even talking about things like, no technology is innately good or bad. It all depends on how you use it. No, we are talking about the innate characteristics or the biases of technologies, because some technologies are more difficult to control, like the internet, or some are essentially controlled centrally, like television, for example, to some extent. And back then we were not giving any credit to this argument, because for us the internet was this sophisticated thing which is related to the West and advanced societies, democracies and such, and authoritarian leaders, autocrats and such. They are a thing of the past and they can't cope with this new technology, let alone adapting it for their own purposes. But now, here we are, 20 years later. It is totally a different picture now, because now I am, for example, living in a country where the internet is, internet is no longer this free space, but actually quite the opposite. It's far beyond from being a free space. It has become a tool for surveillance and also propaganda. And more importantly, it has been normalized. So 20 years ago, I remember that, we were saying that joining a forum or writing on any social media with your own name is weird. We were considering it to be weird. And anytime that someone asks from us to use our actual names, we were considering it to be a fascist move. Today, I'm entering the internet with my citizen ID number in Turkey, almost everywhere. So I give all my information and everything is being surveilled. And I am aware that some or many of the people or accounts that I interact with online are not actual human beings. Some of them are bots, or some of them are biological human beings, but mind-wise, they're just operatives, trolls that are either controlled by political powers, internal or external, and they are there to either create chaos or infuse diffusion, or like spread disinformation, all those negative things that you are also aware of. So how did this happen? There are many reasons, but I would like to emphasize one. We were always talking about the technological side of the things. We were always talking as if technology could be a sole savior of the political and social sphere. We were thinking that those autocrats and authoritarian regimes could not understand those things and could not employ those technologies for their own benefit. So considering the technological side, the political side, and the economic side, and the social cultural side, as if they're different categories, that was the biggest mistake, because they're all intertwined. President Erdogan, back then he used to be the prime minister, 2011-12, I believe. He said that I don't want my members of the parliament to use the Twitter, but I want you to go to the villages and smell the manure, he said. Without the smell of the manure, you can't do politics in Turkey, he said. So no politics on Twitter. Today, his Twitter account is one of the biggest political communication tools in Turkey. So as you can see, we should never say that information communication technologies cannot be used by authoritarian powers, but we should always take into consideration the fact that those technologies, yes, they have biases and they have the innate characteristics, but at the end of the day, it's more about who owns them. It's more about who owns them, not their innate characteristics, but who owns that thing. So the same question could be applied to artificial intelligence. We are always talking about the characteristics or innate nature of AI, which is totally an interesting topic, and we could do this here as well. But at the end of the day, it's more about who owns the thing, right? So Sam Altman and Elon Musk and all the others, it is difficult for me to imagine that when they go to sleep, they are thinking for the good of for the society and the people all around the world. Most probably they have their own interest and nothing else. And their own interest seems to be contradicting with the interests of the people of the world. So this logic could be applied to almost all information communication technologies, but because we didn't do this back then, 20 years ago, here we are. I mean, it's not only the fault of the activists or the people who are in this area of digital communications and politics and society, but we have experienced this backlash against democracy. I remember the time 20 years ago when I was doing my master's degree, I have this essay which begins with the phrase, quote unquote, democracy is on the rise, right? 20 years ago. Today, no student would begin their essay with such sentence, right? So how did this happen? There are many other reasons, but not much of it is directly related with information communication technologies. Yes, social media changed many things. Yes, internet is now being utilized by authoritarian governments to promote their own agenda, but this is the very top level. At the very bottom, there is the economic, social conditions, which marginalizes people, which radicalizes people and such. In Turkey, for example, I would really like to talk about new surveillance technologies where the government can surveil you, and they exist. But the thing is that they don't even need it. 2015, when we had the coup attempt in Turkey, next day, you know what happened? Police was on the street, stopping people, asking their ID, asking for their phone, telling them to open the phone, show me your WhatsApp. They were checking your WhatsApp messages. If they find something, they take you to the police center. If no, they give it to you and tell you to go. So what kind of a surveillance technology do you need here, right? No technology needed. It's just like the police asks you to do something and you do it. The same can be applied in almost all cases of the journalists being imprisoned in Turkey. They take you, they ask for the password. The only thing you could do is not to give it maybe. When it's an iPhone, it takes like 6 months, a year or something for them to open. But it puts you in even in a like worse situation where they assume that you are the worst. I mean, showing it in most cases would make the life a bit easier for you because like when you don't show it, they assume the worst. Most probably you didn't do something that bad, right? So it's about politics, it's about power, and it's about who controls what. The technological side, of course, like internet provides still lots of opportunities. For example, media which allows you to just like pop up, talk, and then be gone, right? That kind of vanishing technologies or ephemeral communication technologies are nice. But for example, Discord itself is banned in Turkey. Fortnite itself is banned in Turkey. And Turkey is not Russia. Turkey is not China. But still, I mean, I have been using this phrase, Turkey is not Russia, Turkey is not China, for the last 20 years. But year and year, when I'm using the phrase, I'm asking myself, is it not? Okay, not yet. But if we continue like this, it will become something like that. And I would like to remind all of you here, your countries are probably in a much better condition than ours in regards to like those kind of freedoms. But the United States used to be one of the best, and now it is becoming one of the worst. So it's all about political power, I would say. Without democracy, without checks and balances, without the political power, then technological solutions could be employed at the tactical level, maybe operational level, but not strategic. Because at the end of the day, the ones who control the power, the ones who have political power and economic power, at the end of the day, they also have the capability to impact technological sphere. Just like some final words, I have just entered my Twitter. I have not been using it for the last week because Turkish Twitter has become this insane place where like nothing normal ever happens. And I'm seeing that after a week, it has become even worse. Just 2 years ago, it used to be somewhere that you could criticize the government or like learn things or like journalists are sharing the information that they have obtained and such. But today, thanks to Elon Musk and his beautiful algorithm, I'm just seeing government trolls. I'm not following any of them, and they are being imposed over me. You can say that, oh, but you can use this other tab, you can create lists and such. I know, like this is my 20th year in Twitter. So, I mean, if it were a kid, it would be going to college. So, I mean, I know all of those, but a normal human being does not use Twitter in this way. So, to all my relatives and such, my friends, my students, what I'm suggesting them is not to use Twitter because like the current status of it is extreme. It's just propaganda, total propaganda, and like the weirdest lies and allegations and such. So, I mean, how did this happen? How did it happen? Elon Musk bought it. Elon Musk has good relationships with the Turkish political center, the president and such. So this is what it is. I don't know what he's doing behind the scenes, what kind of an algorithm it is. It's a black box. Maybe we need to like reveal how it's going on. But at the end of the day, it's all about who owns what and where power resides. We shouldn't be thinking technology as a separate entity, but it's all intertwined with the political and economic powers. That would be all for now. Thank you.
Ja sam namerno želeo da ne intervenišem iz prostog razloga što je ovo jedan deo celine koja nam je dobra da postavimo ton i ovog događaja, zato što vidim i u publici vi to ne možete vidjeti sa ovolike udaljenosti i kad niste prisutni u sali, ali dobro je primljena ova vaša poruka. Eto, tako bih mogao da kažem. Primećujem takve reakcije u publici. I posebno je, mislim, važno da kažemo da ta online cenzura i zastrašivanje i kontrolisanje ne ide samo u online prostoru, već je to samo jedan produžetak onoga što se radi u uživo prostoru. Šantal je tu, tako da je odlično. Imamo još pola sata, ali bih voleo da sa Brankicom sada popričamo da imamo sada situaciju u Srbiji, da postavimo stvari u srpski kontekst, a to je ta jedna isprepletanost online sfere i onoga što se zaista dešava na ulicama. I postoji prirodna jedna želja da se reše neki problemi koji postoje u online sferi. Od govora mržnje, od nekih prelazaka granice slobode izražavanja. Međutim, kada postavimo stvari u kontekst toga šta se dešava i u smislu nadzora koji se već odvija na mrežama i na internetu, i u komunikacijama i telekomunikacijama, i kada se posmatra u tom kontekstu dešavanja u prethodnih godinu ili koliko već godina, kako pristupiti toj temi slobode izražavanja i balansiranja sa srodnim pravima i u pogledu možda i nekih budućih regulacija. Postavljam pitanje šire, ja bih voleo da vam dam uvod u sagledavanje, možda i nekakve poruke koje se tiču i nekih trenutnih nastoja da se danas nekim novim propisima reguliše online ponašanje, na primjer, u Srbiji.
Dobar dan svima. Hvala puno Ani i partnerima Srbija na pozivu i čestitke za organizaciju 6. nedelje privatnosti. Nekako dok i Orhan govori i prethodnici, ja zapravo i razmišljam, Uroše, o savršenoj isprepletanosti i prava na privatnost i prava na slobodu izražavanja i na drugačije mišljenje, na slobodu medija i na sva njihova ugrožavanja. I mislim da nekako i dok vi govorite u uvodnom delu kao da se pravdamo što je naš panel ovako kompleksan, mislim da zapravo svako ko istinski testira realnost samo ovako može da postavi pravo na privatnost danas. Mislim, sve drugo bi bilo zaista jedan pristup koji ne bi imao smisla i kada ne bismo sve ovo stavili u jedan širi kontekst. Jer mi danas imamo zadatak da zapravo govorimo o jednoj od najosjetljivijih granica i u pravnoj teoriji i u pravnoj praksi, dakle o toj tankoj liniji slobode govora i njene zloupotrebe i sve to u kontekstu zaštite prava na privatnost i pravo na informisanje i to u kakvom danas kontekstu. U kontekstu u Srbiji, dakle, da nazovemo to pojačanim društvenim tenzijama, slabljenjem demokratskih institucija, različitim vrstama svakodnevnih kršenja gotovo svih ljudskih prava. I u takvom ambijentu se sloboda govora često instrumentalizuje ne kao sredstvo za razmjenu ideja, već kao opravdanje za govor mržnje, za targetiranje pojedinaca, za kampanje blaćenja, za širenje dezinformacija, dakle za pravljenje jedne kreiranje jedne paralelne realnosti u kojoj živi jedna grupa ljudi i na taj način se pravo na slobodu izražavanja zloupotrebljava kako bi se drugi obeshrabrili da učestvuju u preko neophodnoj debati. Vratit ću se kasnije mislim na te standarde govora i možda u drugom krugu ako bude, zato što bih voljela da naglasim da je nekako i pravo na privatnost tokom mog mandata koji sam obavljala u prethodnom periodu kao poverenica za zaštitu ravnopravnosti nekako postajao sve značajniji. I u tom radu, paralelno sa razvojem digitalnih tehnologija i širenjem online prostora kao zapravo glavne arene našeg javnog života, jer je internet omogućio ekspanziju razmene informacija zaista neslućenih razmera, pa mislim danas smo svedoci da se naši podaci i prikupljaju i obrađuju i skladište i koriste u različite komercijalne i druge svrhe. I zaista je daleko od jasnog određeno koji od tih podataka spadaju u domen privatnosti, a koji u javni. Ali jedno je sigurno, mislim da je to neka ključna moja poruka sa ove nedelje privatnosti, da nam je njegova zaštita potrebnija više nego ikad. I u tome pišem u svojoj novoj kolumni, u novom magazinu, ona je upravo trenutno aktuelna. Pišem upravo o podacima kao novoj nafti, jer dok je Orhan govorio, razmišljala sam o starim dobrim vremenima kada odeš na trafiku i kupiš novine, platiš informaciju. I mislim da će nam zapravo podsjećanje na dobra stara vremena ovoga puta koristiti, da to neće biti korak nazad, nego zapravo progres. I u tom smislu zaista je i Anin tekst Ništa više nije isto, koji nas je podsjetio na dobra vremena, zaista nešto što itekako vredi pročitati, jer je baš nas podsjetila na taj Nevena malo pre, na dobra vremena kada u dijalogu učestvujemo svi sa različitim mišljenjima i uspevamo da se ponašamo civilizovano. Toga kod nas, rekla bih, danas nema. Ja volim uvek da podsjećam i na Evropsku konvenciju za zaštitu ljudskih prava. Znam da ovde sede stručni ljudi, ali nama kada dođu ovako kompleksna vremena, da više se uopšte ljudi ne razumeju, nedostaje vraćanje na fabrička podešavanja i onda postavljamo stvari. Idemo, taj i taj član, izvolite, to su tvoje granice, ovaj treba da radi ovo, ovaj ono. Pa Evropska konvencija naravno kaže da se vlasti neće mešati u vršenje prava, na poštovanje privatnog i porodičnog života, doma i prepiske, sem ako to nije u skladu sa zakonom i neophodno i naravno, znate kako on uvek Evropski sud naglašava, u demokratskom društvu, radi zaštite nacionalne bezbednosti, javnog interesa i da sada ne nabrajam naravno ceo član. U početku su se slučajevi diskriminacije uglavnom i odnosili na te neke klasične oblasti, zapošljavanje, obrazovanje, pristup uslugama, ali se to vremenom sve više pomeralo upravo na zloupotrebu ličnih podataka, uznemiravanje, targetiranje, javno diskreditovanje i u digitalnom i u ovom okruženju, uostalom vi ste tako rekli. I u tom smislu zaštita privatnosti, pravo na privatnost se nametnula kao vrlo važan segment rada, jer su povrede prava na privatnost često predstavljale samo uvodni ili prvi korak u zapravo povredu prava na ravnopravnost. I sve je bilo više značajnijih slučajeva diskriminacije. Neću sada da ih navodim, ali evo, mislim da sam i prošle godine pominjala, tu je već dolazilo često do toga da se iznese podatak o nacionalnoj pripadnosti ili etničkom poreklu ili o zdravstvenom stanju, recimo osobe koje boluju od HIV-a i onda se to stavi crvenim slovima u sobi pacijenta ili na kartonu za slučaj da neko nije video veliko crveno, a vi posle živite. Mislim, pričamo o stigmatizaciji, jer možete tek onda zamisliti kako izgleda objavljivanje matičnih brojeva, adresa ljudi kojima mi svedočimo danas, pa se oni šeruju kroz društvene mreže. I ovo me podsjeća na ono tamno vreme, srednji vek, kada su se podaci o ljudima pribijali na drveće, jer da se označi ko je ne misli onako kako misli većina u selu. A gde će nas odvesti to kao civilizaciju, to ćemo tek da vidimo. I u tom smislu želim samo da pomenem, ipak meni je važan u vraćanju na fabrička podešavanja, naravno praksa pomenutog Evropskog suda za ljudska prava koji upravo nas i podsjeća da uvek u zavisnosti od konkretnih okolnosti moramo da utvrdimo koje je pravo potrebno zaštititi ili, ajde da tako kažem, dati mu primat i vođenja računa o balansu. I u tom smislu je značajna, pričam zbog onih ljudi koji nisu svi u ovoj materiji, ali nemam vremena da elaboriram, slučaj Pek protiv Ujedinjenog kraljevstva 2003. po meni jedna od vrlo značajnih presuda, gde ukratko, nakon pokušaja samoubistva sečenjem vena pomoću kuhinskog noža gospodina Peka, koji je bolovao od depresije, došlo do niza zapravo neverovatnih okolnosti daljeg njegovog kršenja prava na privatnost i objavljivanje tog snimka koji je urađen video nadzorom u mestu u kome se dešava taj događaj, ali se kasnije te fotografije i video snimak koriste na neverovatne načine, naročito u lokalnim medijima. Njegova njega prepoznaju njegovi prijatelji i rodbina, on biva izložen različitim vrstama stigmatizacije i drugim vrstama kršenja ljudskih prava. I sud u svojoj odluci kaže da je gospodin Pek prikazan u više navrata u meri koja daleko prevazilazi izloženost običnog prolaznika očima javnosti u trenutku kada se dešava pokušaj samoubistva i da čin objave snimka prevazilazi ono što je podnosilac predstavke mogao da vidi. Dakle, sud je našao da nisu postojali opravdani razlozi za otkrivanje identiteta i da je on bio žrtva ozbiljnog mešanja države u pravo na privatnost od strane lokalnih medija i da mu nije pružena adekvatna pravna zaštita i pravo na delotvorni lek. I da je došlo do povrede člana 8 i 13. Ovo sve naglašavam zbog aktuelnih slučajeva kod nas i da država zaboravlja na obavezu da pruži adekvatnu pravnu zaštitu i pravni lek. Nedavni napadi na novinare i aktiviste u Srbiji, kako online, tako i offline sferi, često ipak imaju rodnu dimenziju. Mislim da je to važno da, Uroše, pomenemo možda u ovom postavljanju u kontekst, ako se slažete, jer su žene nesrazmerno izložene kampanjama mržnje, seksualizovanom govoru, pretnjama, pokušajima diskreditacije zasnovanim na rodnim stereotipima i ne pogađaju samo i pojedince, već zaista imaju efekat zastrašivanja i sklanjanja žene iz javnog života. Mislim da je važno, s obzirom da je OEBS ovde važan partner, da pomenemo i nedavni događaj u okviru 16 dana aktivizma u Beču, predstavnik za slobodu medija Jambra tu ukazuje i u svom poslednjem izveštaju posebno insistira i izdvaja taj deo koji se odnosi na ugrožavanje bezbednosti i pretnji novinarima i novinarkama. Naravno, to mislim za sve države učesnice OEBS-a, ali Srbija svakako nije svetli primerak dobre prakse u okviru obeležavanja 10 godina projekta Safety of Female in Online Journalist. Sofio, mislim da se tako Sanja izgovara taj događaj. Zašto ovo pominjem? Pozvane su tada države učesnice OEBS-a da pokažu istinski svoju odlučnost i privrženost zaštiti žena novinarki, jer želim da kažem da je vrlo važan glas međunarodne zajednice, da je to uvek prilika da iskoriste tu svoju mogućnost i privilegiju da govore javno. Jer zapravo je to jedna drugačija pozicija. To je nama vrlo važno i kada se radi o OEBS-u i o Evropskoj uniji i u Ujedinjenim nacijama. U tom smislu zaista jeste vrlo važno što imamo danas i specijalnu izvestiteljku, jer ta je prilika podići glas. Ljudi koji imaju tu privilegiju treba da podignu. Različite slučajevi kršenja prava na privatnost, na nediskriminaciju i druga upravo ukazuju na ozbiljne izazove u primjeni standarda ljudskih prava i pokazuju da pravni okvir sam po sebi nije dovoljan ukoliko ne postoji dosledna institucionalna reakcija za koju mi vidimo da ne postoji, da način na koji država reaguje na ovakve pojave zapravo direktno odražava nivo zapravo i vladavine prava i demokratskih vrednosti. Ja mislim da mi ovde smo svedoci toga da naša država čak često reaguje podsticanjem na kršenje ljudskih prava i osude gotovo više i da nema. Osim kada pod pritiskom medija i javnosti nekako ne dođemo do nekog nemuštog izvinjenja ili osude. Pa evo, možda ovaj poslednji slučaj koji za mene ima dva nova fenomena, zbog stavljanja u kontekst govorim, to je napad na kameru, na ekipu N1, novinarku Maju Nikolić i snimatelja Ivana Pavlovića. I negde sam tad čula onako u medijima vrlo dobro postavljena diskusija. Možda mi treba ovde da uvedemo Svetski dan borbe protiv televizije. Mislim, jeste bilo smešno. Mislim da je to Radovan Seratlić rekao, ali dosta onako istinito. Jer posle nekog vremena neki ministri izađoše i osudiše to što se desilo, ali najnoviji trend koji mene najviše zabrinuo je reakcija policije koja posmatra to što se dešava, dakle u fizičkom svetu bez reakcije i jedna nova, vrlo kreativna pojava. Napade na novinare poput ove koje pominjem se iskoristi da se postavi pitanje njima dakle novinar, i nama, onim drugima, znači šta god to značilo, onima koji u izveštavanju ukazuju na različita kršenja zakona i omogućavaju pravo na drugačije mišljenje, koje je vrlo važan segment prava na slobodu izražavanja, i suština je ostvarivanja prava, koje to pitanje glasi: gde ste bili kada se napadaju naši novinari? Zašto ne osudite sa sve naglašenom tom rodnom dimenzijom, jer je tu žena u pitanju novinarka, i onda se odgovorni profesionalni ljudi pitaju: čekajte, kako nisam video koji je to napad, da li je trebalo, ja sam bila u toj prilici i verujem da mnogi ovdje ljudi, i onda se nekim čudom ispostavi da se uvek radi o jednoj istoj novinarki tabloida, ili 2 ili 3, i da niko ne može da nađe taj napad. Ja ciljano, samo da vam kažem, ne izbegavam ja, mislim, ja sam dosta imala dobro, samo zbog ljudi koji nije, ja uvek se ispostavlja da je to novinarka Informera. A zašto ne pominjem ime? Meni je cilj da pomenem ime žrtava, zato sam malo preizgovorila ljude na koji je izvršen napad, jer mi inače imamo još jednu novu pojavu, da vi što veće gluposti i gadosti uradite, vi dobijete sve više medijskog prostora, jer se onda vaša imena, sećate se, to je onako kao slučaj Šešelj, izgovorimo opasnu, glupu stvar, dobit ćemo prostor u medijima. Dakle, ja zbog toga hoću da izbjegnem imena onih koji rade protivpravne stvari, a da pričamo o ljudima koji su bili izloženi. I onda ide sledeće. Ako i dođe, ovako to izgleda, sledeći performans: gde ste, izdajnici, blokaderi, da osudite napad na našu novinarku, uz obavezan dodatak majku, sestru. To vam je inače novi narativ kada se radi o ravnopravnosti i priči o ženama, jer je žena zapravo pre svega majka i ona vredi kao majka, i tu je također polje gde dolazi do diskriminacije i povrede prava na ravnopravnost. I ja za kraj u odgovoru na ovo vaše pitanje kandidujem sledeće teme koje treba da idu zajedno u kontekstu prava na ravnopravnost, i u sledećem ću se vratiti na ono što ste me pitali baš za medije, a to je ko su naši, ko su njihovi novinari, gde su granice naše pre svega duhovne i moralne bede i niskosti, i gde su granice ljudskosti, i glavno pitanje: ko nas štiti ako policija pred kamerama ne reaguje na napade na novinare? Vrlo je važno ovo, ko štiti onda sve ostalo, kako da izađemo iz ove agonije. I da završim, da stvarno ništa nije bitnije od očuvanja slobode medija i privatnosti istovremeno, jer je opasnost toliko velika da se upravo moramo koncentrisati na zaštitu slobode medija, jer bez slobodnih medija mi više nećemo biti u prilici da ukažemo na ostala kršenja prava, niti da ih zaštitimo, jer nećemo moći da dokažemo da je do tog kršenja došlo. I to je vrlo važno za nas, za naš kontekst ovde. I nećemo moći da dokažemo, ja moram se vratiti na ono što je meni uvijek, mislim, i to je ključna stvar, pravo na ravnopravnost, koje se sada gotovo sistematski krši, i to ono pravo po osnovu političkih ubeđenja i članstva u političkim i sindikalnim organizacijama, jer mi smo svedoci da zaista imamo sistemsku diskriminaciju, jer više nema prostora ni vazduha, kamoli posla za ljude koji drugačije misle. Ne da nema dijaloga, nego nema ostvarenja prava na rad, zdravstvenu zaštitu. Nemate mogućnost da ostvarite mnoga druga prava zbog drugačijeg političkog mišljenja, i to stvarno moraju da ostanu na neki način teme koje treba da tretira u krajnjem slučaju i Nedelja privatnosti, koja je sada prepoznata kao zaista jedna kredibilna platforma za razgovor i koja stavlja pravo na privatnost upravo u jedan adekvatan, široki kontekst.
Mi se bavimo tim odmazdama i tom dimenzijom gde se zapravo kršenjem privatnosti onda ta odmazda i sprovodi. Dobro je da smo dobili ovaj uvid u to kako to može da izgleda i u online i u offline sferi. Šantal bih zamolio sada da nam da jedan prikaz novih stvari, pošto, ajde da dam mali uvod, dakle, Šantal radi u organizaciji Article 19, koja ima dovoljno iskustva da može da uhvati neke trendove na planetarnom nivou u suzbijanju slobode izražavanja. Šta je to drugačije što se pojavilo u posljednjih nekoliko godina? Šta prepoznajete kao trendove i načine i metode suzbijanja slobode izražavanja kako na nivou javnih politika, tako i na nivou praksi vlada? Mislim, moje pitanje je pre svega usmereno na praksi institucija i vlada, ali ako želite možete i šire. Ali dakle, šta to vlade rade sada drugačije u kontekstu online suzbijanja sloboda, što nisu ranije radile, a što im ide u korist u cilju zadržavanja svoje moći i suzbijanja glasova koji misle drugačije?
Thank you and hello everyone. It's nice to see you. Unfortunately, there was a bit of a mix-up with the time zones, so apologies for joining late. I also would have wished to be there in person, but we will do with what I can. I want to mix maybe my intervention a bit with some of the excellent points that have already been made, because I think they already show a little bit some of the trends that we are seeing. I think generally speaking, at the moment, globally, but also in Europe, two of the main aspects that seem to me are driving the agenda is sort of the geopolitical moment that we're in, where national security, for obvious reasons, is started to really take center stage once more, and a lot of the framing around protection of democracy shifts more and more not to speak about protection of human rights and fundamental rights as a means for also a strong and resilient democracy, but we're looking more at protecting democracies from a safety angle. And once we look at these issues from a safety angle, unfortunately, this usually means that human rights considerations take a somewhat second place or become secondary. When one thing which we argue always is that the human rights framework allows, and this has been mentioned, I believe, as well, allows for considerations of public safety, of national security, but all in the interest of, again, allowing the protection of human rights, which should be sort of the highest priority, and which will also allow for the best and most nuanced and sustainable responses. The second big aspect, I think, is this quest for competitiveness. In particular, when it comes to tech, AI obviously seen as the main driver that will make the difference between whether an economy is going to be able to thrive or not, and connected to this push for deregulation in the EU. For some years now, they have been proud to be at the forefront of creating new regulation, of putting fundamental rights more central to all discussions on tech policy. It doesn't mean that the regulations that necessarily came out of that process were perfect, but you could tell that user rights, again, fundamental rights, were very important in those debates. And very few years later, because of US pressure, again, because of the moment we're in, I think we see already the trend to wanting to reverse those considerations, to deregulate, to weaken enforcement of existing regulations. And that is something that becomes very, very problematic for civil society, and it becomes more challenging to find these spaces, to find these allies, to push, again, for more user-centered, more human rights-centered regulation across the board, really. I want to pick up on a few things mentioned, for example, by Orhan, where I think I fully agree that the challenges are often not necessarily with the technology. The technology poses challenges, but a lot of the underlying political challenges, which also translate then into the question how we regulate technology, how we use technology, is, as you say, the social and economic underlying trends, right? What explains also the political moment that we're in. I think there is a problem where even the broader public is less interested to hear about human rights as long as they don't feel, or they're willing to trade human rights against what they perceive as more important economic security and economic advantages. So I think that narrative has worked to a certain extent and is also used by governments to say we need sort of practical, fast, real-time solutions that, again, will not center human rights sufficiently. Another point, I think, and I came in the middle of your intervention when you mentioned about who owns the technology. Let's look at who has the power, who are the owners, who profits from it. Where I agree, at the same time, I do think sometimes there has been, you know, when it was perceived that the companies like Meta or Twitter were in the hands of those who maybe aligned more with our values. And we have seen that with political realignment or with changes in ownership, those values and principles that guide the actions of these companies can change very quickly, because after all, they are very much profit driven. So I think it's very important. Now we see, for example, Upscrolled is a new application which has just in recent days been discussed a lot as a potential alternative to the likes of TikTok as a new social media owned by new people and so on. And I think it's very important that even when we think ownership could be more like who owns these technologies, could be more susceptible potentially to our arguments, that we still apply the same scrutiny and principles to ensure that the governance is strong and that it effectively does not depend on who owns the technology, but that these checks and balances are inherent, that transparency is inherent, that user empowerment is inherent. I also want to react to a few points, and I'm trying to be fast because I think we're already almost running out of time. But around some of the key freedom of expression challenges and some of the balanced discussions that we must have, and which is also a reason why I find the work on freedom of expression so fascinating and interesting, because it is complicated. For example, we've heard about the right to freedom of expression sometimes being abused to attack people, to further marginalize people. And this is something that we've always looked at Article 19 when we've done, for example, work on hate speech. Hate speech can, of course, serve to violate freedom of expression. It can suppress, again, it can silence people, it can suppress voices of those who are already marginalized. So it is a freedom of expression issue. And then at the same time, of course, the responses to hate speech, government-led responses, and the question was also what are governments doing themselves to stifle freedom of expression. They lead the responses to questions of hate speech and disinformation, where very often they are themselves some of the main sources of disinformation and of hate speech and of inflammatory rhetoric. So that is a challenge in and of itself. We also heard about questions of attacks against women journalists, which again, we have recently issued a paper around the international standards that govern how investigations should take place when there is either online or offline attacks against women journalists. And of course, often law enforcement is not well enough equipped, and they're not willing. There's not the willingness to take allegations of threats seriously and investigate seriously, and also look at these issues through a gendered lens. So that is one challenge. And then on the other side, we've seen criminalization of types of speech like cyberbullying, cyber harassment, maybe with well-meaning intentions, again, to tackle some of these issues, like attacks against women journalists or women politicians or other groups. But then at the same time, the legislation is formulated in a manner which is too broad and can, in and of itself, also constitute a violation of freedom of expression. And here, We heard about the need to go back to the European Convention on Human Rights, sort of back to basics. And here also very often we have to remind people that the European Convention of Human Rights and international human rights law protects also speech that shocks, offends, and disturbs. So yes, we would like to go back to maybe a time, in case it existed, where speech was more civilized, where the public discourse was more civilized, but this is not the same thing as allowing restrictions on freedom of expression on that same bar. It's not only civilized speech that is protected, but it is any speech that cannot, so speech will be protected as long as the restriction doesn't meet those strict requirements of legality, legitimacy, necessity, and proportionality. So I think some of the challenges that links to some of the challenges that we have around the narratives around freedom of expression, which are very often simplified when, legislations, like we can look at the Digital Services Act in the EU, are either on the one hand tagged as it's a censorship tool, which is a very simplified and wrong narrative, and doesn't really look at what the Commission has been doing. It doesn't really look at the letter of the text, whilst at the same time we observe that there's the other camp who sees that legislation like the DSA being one example, but other tech policies being under attack, and then sort of the inclination is to say we need to defend it no matter what, and if we're critical and nuanced about the challenges of the legislation, then we play into the hands of those who seek to criticize it. So again, I think as civil society, this is one of the challenges we have, where right now it feels like we're losing the narrative battle. We're, even amongst civil society, are losing the language and belief in the relevance and impact of the international legal system, of the international human rights system. And I think we need to go back to that and sort of re-examine how we can make that again more impactful and show the relevance more to the broader public. Maybe as a very final point, also just trying to link all the dots. I mean, a lot of the discussions we have now is around also children's safety. Children's safety, which of course needs to be a priority, but often those discussions again don't center also children's rights and children's right to freedom of expression. The discussions are also very willing to undermine the right to online anonymity to quite a large extent, or require again age verification through various means, facial recognition technologies or electronic IDs and so on, which are very problematic from a freedom of expression, privacy, and right to be also active online on an anonymous basis. And even anonymity online is something that has been questioned because of all the trolls, because of all the attacks, which is understandable, when at the same time those very groups or individuals from certain groups that tend to be attacked or targeted most are also the ones who rely most on anonymity online. So what we're losing a bit is the nuance. What we're losing a bit is the right-centered approach to all these very challenging and fast-moving questions. And I think you're right. You enter Twitter every 2 months, and it feels like a completely different space. It feels like the trends have gotten worse, the technology is worse, what Grok does is worse, and obviously that can be applied to many other social media and uses of tech. But yeah, I think that is what we need to do. Again, we need to keep centering the debate on human rights, but also we need to do a much better job at winning the narrative battle around why it is so important. And
Thank you, Šantal. Volio bih da možda sada za kraj, pošto imamo još samo 2 minuta predviđenih, da ponovo vratimo stvari u srpski kontekst. Brankici, da li ste čuli za jedan predlog zakona koji je predložio ombudsman?
Čula. Ko nije čuo? Da. Iako sam saglasna naravno sa Orhanom da je online prostor i polje visokog rizika i da umjesto participacije on negde sve češće se koristi i za nadzor i za targetiranje i za koordinisane napade i za zastrašivanje u tom, ali je za mnoge građane to zapravo samo još jedan posljednji prostor, jedan od retkih kanala slobode izražavanja. I onda, kada vi sada hoćete da izvršite intervenciju zakonsku i da napravite regulaciju, ne sporeći da postoji potreba za boljom regulacijom, nego vi onako iz nebuha izađete i date predlog. Ja sumnjam u dobre namere. Vrlo je taj predlog nejasan. Čak mi se čini u njemu kao da se odustaje od evropskih integracija, ali tamo nema nikakvog usklađivanja sa najnovijim evropskim aktima. I upitna je i nadležnost. Mislim da je upitna i nadležnost, zato što to nisu pitanja iz domena nadležnosti zaštitnika građana. Ali jedno je sigurno. Meni se čini da bi to moglo da se pretvori čak u sredstvo za još jednu novu cenzuru, pritisak i sužavanje polja za kritiku. Meni deluje da to stoji iza tog predloga i da mislim da dalja regulacija sama po sebi ne znači bolju zaštitu. Mislim da mi treba mnogo više da se fokusiramo na osnaživanje, da imamo snažne, nezavisne i transparentne institucije, jer ako vi želite da imate nadležnost, verujte mi da ćete je naći. Naći ćete način da zaštitite građanina, a to svako ko je na čelu institucije za zaštitu ljudskih prava zna. A inače mi je sam predlog onako i način predlaganja delovao na ovaj naš trend koji traje već godinama. To je kao ono Miloš Obrenović, idi vidi šta narod priča, šta im je interesantna tema. Onda narod kaže, baš je dugačko da imamo čas 45 minuta. I onda izađe ministar prosvete i kaže ovako, izlazimo sa dubokom reformom, obratite pažnju, vrlo ozbiljnom reformom sistema obrazovanja, skraćujemo čas na pola sata. Ja sam aplaudirala. Tako da, eto, možete i vi nama pošto.
Hvala na tome. Još ćemo imati 2-3 minuta samo za finalne poente. Molim vas, oba panelista i Šantal i Orhan, po 1 minut, odnosno po 2 rečenice da zaključimo ovaj razgovor. Dakle, ajde počet ćemo od Orhana. Dakle, kako zadržati bezbednim i slobodnim online prostor i koje su to neke taktike koje mi kao građani možemo da preuzmemo, da se mobilišemo i utičemo? Veoma kratko, mislim 1 minut bih voleo da ograničimo.
So, I have many notes, but just a one-liner here. For the last 20-25 years, our field has been too much focused on the legalities of the things. This is an American-centric approach. Turkey, for example, is not a legalist country. Does not matter what it is written on the law. At the end of the day, it's all about the power relations and political practices in the field. Just because it says something there does not necessarily mean that it will be applied in the same way. Most probably it's going to be used sometimes in the quite opposite way. For example, the hate speech, which was laws, which was like passed by Germany to fight against neo-Nazis, the same law is now being used by the government in Turkey to oppress and silence the opposition. For example, Islamophobia, right? All those concepts in Turkey, it is being used to oppress the ones who are asking for like secular laws and such. So it doesn't matter what it says. At the end of the day, it's all political power. It's all like eco-politics. We do not have a First Amendment. Nothing on the Turkish constitutions guarantees your freedom of speech, right? So this is not the United States of America. Even there, it doesn't work, right? So norms, society, political power. So I would say, I'm so sorry to like all the lawyers and legalists and people. What they are doing is really, really important, but we need to prioritize public opinion and political activism, not legal, because it doesn't work. That would be my only like little contribution. Thank you.
I možda i za Šantal slično pitanje, ali bih voleo da usmerimo na šta civilno društvo pre svega treba da se usmeri, šta su to ključne stvari koje na nivou javnih politika treba napadati u narednom periodu kako bi se sprečila najveća moguća šteta po slobodi izražavanja na internetu.
Thank you. And following on what Orhan has, as a lawyer, I have to say, you would want me definitely to concentrate more on the legal aspects because I don't think I would be a very persuasive political activist otherwise. So you want me to stick with the text, but I agree it's not enough. And I think, again, looking at the moment now, where as civil society we tend to engage, as you say, with the wording of legislations, with taking place in consultations on codes of conduct and implementing codes and working very closely within the system. I think, yes, of course, that needs to continue, but also given weak enforcement, given where the political appetite sits now, it might not be enough. I do think strategic litigation, going to the courts still can also be quite a strong tool when it feels like the elected politicians. It depends on the context. Now, of course, I'm aware that this is very context specific. When Parliament is going in a direction that is more problematic, but I also fully agree that we need to talk more about political power. Name the problem of lobbyists. Name the problem of the increasing conversions of, for the purposes of our discussion, perhaps like tech companies and governments, and speak about those power relations more specifically rather than only speaking about provision 260 in XYZ code, because I also think that will be more impactful with the broader public, which in the end needs to buy into what we value and what we believe in, because otherwise I think it would be very complicated to make proper progress.
Hvala naravno. Eto, nadam se da je bilo korisno da ovom nekom zoom in pa onda zoom out taktikom malo osvetlimo stvari koje se isprepliću na globalnoj i srpskoj areni. Opet kažem, nismo baš toliko specifični, čini mi se. Iako volimo da govorimo da se kod nas dešavaju neke unikatne stvari, pa i da smo neke stvari prvi radili, globalni trendovi i globalni vetrovi duvaju nepovoljno, čini mi se, po slobodu izražavanja i što ih više budemo svesni, mislim da ćemo lakše moći da im se odupremo. Hvala vam puno i sada pravimo pauzu.